the cold, textured steel of the weapons rack pressed against Lieutenant Anya Sharma's palms. Upside down, the world was a muted palette of gray concrete and dusty black floor mats. Blood pooled in her head, a dull, rhythmic drumbeat against her temples that matched the slow, controlled descent of her body. Her uniform trousers, tucked neatly into her desert boots, hung straight down, defying gravity. Each repetition was a study in precision, a slow, 4-second negative motion, until the crown of her head was a whisper away from the floor, a hold for a full second at the point of maximum tension, and then a powerful, explosive press back to the starting position, arms locked, body a rigid line against the corrugated metal wall. The only sounds were the soft scuff of her boots against the wall and the impossibly quiet cadence of her own breathing. In on the way down, out on the way up. She was on her 24th repetition, her deltoids and triceps burning with a clean, clarifying fire. She was not here to build muscle. She was here to forge certainty. This was her meditation, a physical catechism recited in a language of strain and control. She focused on the point where her control met its limit, and then pushed just beyond it. Remember why you are here. The heavy door to the weight room slammed open, a cacophony of metal on metal that shattered the quiet. Heavy bootfalls followed, accompanied by the loud, self-satisfied laughter of men who believed the space belonged to them. Anya did not break her form. Her focus narrowed, filtering out the intrusion. The world remained upside down. "Well, look what we have here," a voice boomed, thick with manufactured confidence. "The Navy's new science experiment doing her morning yoga." Anya recognized the voice. Captain Declan Thorne, United States Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance. He had a reputation that preceded him, one built on swagger and a carefully curated history of field successes that always seemed to omit the contributions of others. He moved through the world as if it were a territory to be conquered, and her presence at this joint service forward staging area was, to him, an unacceptable annexation of his domain. She began her 25th repetition. Inhale. Down. The voices of Thorne's subordinates echoed his amusement, a chorus of sycophantic chuckles. She felt their eyes on her, a weight more tangible than the force of gravity pulling her toward the floor. They saw a woman. They saw a smaller frame. They saw a deviation from their norm. They did not see the years of relentless, monotonous, soul-crushing training that had earned her the right to be in this room, wearing this uniform. They did not see the candidate who had finished first in her class in land navigation, the one who could assemble and disassemble 7 different weapon systems blindfolded, the one whose peer reviews consistently highlighted an unnerving calmness under pressure. Hold, exhale, press. Her arms locked with a final definitive snap. She held the handstand for 3 more full breaths, allowing the blood to begin its slow retreat from her head, letting the burn in her shoulders subside into a steady warmth. Only then, with a fluidity that belied the immense strain of the exercise, did she scissor her legs down, her boots landing on the concrete floor with a sound no louder than a sigh. She stood, turned, and faced them. Her face was impassive, her breathing already returning to a slow, steady rhythm. Captain Thorne stood with his arms crossed over his barrel chest, a smirk plastered on his face. He was flanked by 2 of his corporals, both of them trying to imitate his posture of casual dominance. Thorne was a caricature of a warrior, all bulging muscles and aggressive jawline, a man who seemed to believe that volume was a substitute for authority. "Finished with your stretching, Lieutenant?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Don't want you to pull a muscle when you're carrying the water bottles for the real operators." Anya met his gaze without blinking. She did not offer a retort. She did not defend herself. Her silence was a wall, smooth and featureless, offering him no purchase. She walked past him toward the water fountain, her movements economical and deliberate. His smirk tightened. Her refusal to engage was a greater insult than any comeback she could have offered. It told him that he did not register as a threat, or even as an equal. He was simply an obstacle in the environment, like a loose rock on a trail, to be noted and navigated around. As she drank from the fountain, she could feel his glare on her back, hot and heavy with wounded pride. He had tried to establish his place at the top of the food chain. He had failed. And in that failure, Anya knew, the real danger had just begun. The forward staging area was an island of prefabricated metal and razor wire dropped into an ocean of ochre sand. It existed in a state of perpetual low-grade tension, a place where boredom and adrenaline were the only 2 currencies. It was a temporary home to a collection of specialists from every branch of the United States Armed Forces, a testbed for a new doctrine of integrated operations. The official name for Anya's unit was the Expeditionary Analysis Group, a deliberately vague title for a team designed to operate in the gray spaces between conventional warfare and clandestine intelligence gathering. Unofficially, the other personnel on the base called them the Misfits, or, less charitably, the Lab Rats. Anya's arrival 2 weeks prior had been a quiet disruption. She was not just a naval officer, she was a graduate of the brutal selection and training pipeline for naval special warfare, the first woman to successfully complete the course and receive the coveted Trident insignia. Her assignment to this experimental unit was a source of endless speculation. To the command element, she was a data point, a test case to be observed and evaluated. To the enlisted personnel, she was a curiosity, a ghost story made real. To men like Captain Thorne, she was an affront, a living symbol of a world changing in ways they refused to accept. Her days fell into a rigid, self-imposed routine. Pre-dawn physical training, weapons maintenance, mission planning exercises, language study. Hours spent in the sensitive compartmented information facility, memorizing satellite imagery and intelligence reports until the arid, mountainous terrain of the surrounding country was as familiar to her as the back of her own hand. She spoke only when necessary, her contributions in briefings always concise, data-driven, and devoid of emotion. She moved through the base with a quiet purpose that many misinterpreted as aloofness or even arrogance. Only one person seemed to see past the surface. Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Vance was the senior enlisted leader for the Expeditionary Analysis Group, a man whose face was a roadmap of a dozen forgotten conflicts. He had seen everything, and nothing surprised him anymore. He watched Anya with an unnerving stillness, his gaze neutral, analytical. He never offered praise, but he never joined in the veiled mockery either. He simply observed, his presence a silent, constant evaluation. Anya understood that his respect, if it could be earned at all, would be granted only on his own terms and only after it had been proven beyond any doubt. There were others, like Lieutenant Miller, a young naval intelligence officer who seemed caught between the old guard's skepticism and a burgeoning curiosity. Miller would watch her during briefings, his brow furrowed in concentration, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. He was young enough to have grown up in a world where her presence was theoretically possible. But he was now seeing the theory collide with the hard, unyielding reality of military culture. He was an ally in waiting, his allegiance undeclared. The institutional bias was a low-frequency hum, a background noise that she had long ago learned to tune out. It was in the way maintenance crews double-checked her equipment requests, the way the supply sergeant always asked if she was sure she needed that particular piece of gear. It was in the conversations that would abruptly stop when she entered a room, and in the condescendingly simple explanations of tactical concepts she had already mastered. It was a war of 1,000 tiny cuts, designed to make her feel like an outsider, an intruder who did not belong. Anya ignored it all. She ate alone, she trained alone, she studied alone. Her solitude was not a sign of weakness, it was a tactical decision. It allowed her to observe the intricate social dynamics of the base without becoming entangled in them. She mapped the alliances, the rivalries, the subtle hierarchies. She learned who was competent, who was insecure, who was a liability. Captain Thorne, she had concluded within her first 48 hours, was the most dangerous kind of liability, a man whose ego was a direct threat to mission integrity. He mistook aggression for strength and volume for leadership. He led a small, loyal cadre of Marine Corps reconnaissance operators who mirrored his behavior, creating a toxic pocket of arrogance within the fragile experimental ecosystem of the joint unit. They were a problem waiting for an opportunity to manifest. And Anya knew, with a cold, clear certainty, that Thorne would eventually create that opportunity himself. The mess hall was the base's social epicenter, a large, echoing chamber that smelled of industrial-strength coffee and fried food. It was where the unwritten laws of the base hierarchy were most visibly enforced. Pilots sat with other pilots, intelligence analysts kept to their own quiet corners, and the combat arms operators, particularly Captain Thorne's Force Reconnaissance Marines, occupied the central tables as if by divine right. Their laughter was always the loudest, their stories the most exaggerated. Anya took her tray, grilled chicken, steamed rice, and a pile of green beans, and found an empty table in a far corner facing the entrance. It was a habit ingrained by years of training. Always know your exits, always maintain situational awareness. She ate with the same deliberate economy she applied to everything else. her focus on the meal, not the noise around her. But the noise was coming for her. Captain Thorne and his team entered the mess hall and made a deliberate detour toward her table. He pulled a chair out from the table next to hers, spun it around, and sat down, straddling it backward. His two corporals stood behind him, a pair of smirking sentinels. "Eating all by your lonesome, Lieutenant?" Thorne began, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the nearby tables. "Teamwork is a big part of what we do out here. You should try it sometime." Anya finished a mouthful of rice before looking up at him. She did not speak. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "The thing is," Thorne continued, leaning forward, "some of us are a little concerned about unit cohesion. We've got this new integration policy, and when standards get adjusted for political reasons, it makes people nervous. It makes me nervous. It means I can't trust that the person to my left or my right is truly up to the task." He was no longer just talking to her. He was performing for the audience he had gathered. Anya placed her fork down, her movements calm and measured. She could feel dozens of eyes on her now. She saw Lieutenant Miller a few tables away, looking uncomfortable. She saw Master Chief Vance near the serving line, his expression as impassive as ever, yet he was watching the scene unfold with an intensity that belied his relaxed posture. "So," Thorne said, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face, "I propose a little friendly, inter-service team-building exercise, a simple test of grit, you and me. Right here, arm wrestling." He slammed his elbow down onto her table, scattering a few grains of rice. His hand was open, waiting. It was a classic alpha male power play, a public challenge designed to humiliate her regardless of the outcome. If she refused, she was weak. If she accepted and lost, she was weak. If she somehow won, he would claim he was not trying, that he did not want to hurt the little lady. It was a game she could not win by his rules. So, she would not play. "I'm not interested, Captain," she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through the low murmur of the room. Thorne's grin faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected a nervous refusal or a foolish acceptance. This calm, direct dismissal was not on his script. "What's the matter, Lieutenant? Afraid you'll break a nail?" The corporals behind him snickered on cue. "I am here to perform my duties," Anya stated, her voice still level. "Arm wrestling is not one of them. Now, if you will excuse me, I would like to finish my lunch." She picked up her fork. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. It was a direct challenge to his authority, delivered in a room full of his peers and subordinates. Humiliation began to curdle into anger in Thorne's eyes. He had instigated this public confrontation, and he could not back down without losing face. His ego was now in control, overriding what little tactical sense he possessed. In a swift, impulsive movement, he reached across the table and grabbed her right wrist. His grip was like iron. "We're not done here," he growled, his voice low and menacing. The performative friendliness was gone. The mess hall fell silent. This was no longer a game. A male captain had just put his hands on a female lieutenant. It was a flagrant breach of protocol, a line that should never have been crossed. Anya looked down at his thick fingers wrapped around her wrist. She felt the pressure, the attempt at physical intimidation. She did not try to pull away. That would have been a contest of strength, a contest she would likely lose, and that would only escalate his aggression. Instead, she did something he could never have anticipated. She relaxed. Anya let her body go slack for a microsecond, yielding to his pull. Thorne, expecting resistance, was caught off balance as she moved with his momentum, not against it. As he instinctively pulled her forward, she rose from her chair, her motion a smooth, continuous spiral. Her left hand came up not to strike, but to gently cup his elbow. Her feet shifted, a small, precise pivot on the balls of her feet that changed the entire angle of their engagement. It was a simple principle of biomechanics, not of combat. Leverage, not strength. She kept his wrist pinned to the table with his own forward pressure, while her left hand guided his elbow upward and her pivot forced his shoulder into a position it was not designed to go. There was no strike, no sudden violent twist. It was a quiet, inexorable application of anatomical reality. Captain Thorne's confident smirk dissolved into a grimace of shocked disbelief, then a gasp of sharp, undeniable pain. His body had no choice but to follow the path of least resistance to alleviate the immense pressure on his shoulder joint. That path led directly downward. His legs buckled and he dropped to one knee with a heavy thud on the linoleum floor. His grip on her wrist vanished, his hand flying open as his brain screamed at him to relieve the strain. Anya immediately released his elbow. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. She stood over him, her expression unchanged. She had not been aggressive. She had not been violent. She had been a technician, applying a precise solution to a mechanical problem. The problem was Captain Thorne's hand on her arm. The solution was to make him remove it. She looked down at the captain, who was now kneeling on the floor of the mess hall, breathing heavily, his face a mask of fury and shame. The room was utterly silent. No one was laughing. Lieutenant Miller was staring, his mouth slightly agape. Across the room, Anya met Master Chief Vance's eyes. For the first time, she saw something other than neutral assessment in his gaze. It was a flicker of understanding, perhaps even a hint of approval. A nearly imperceptible nod. Without another word, Anya sat back down, picked up her fork and took a bite of her now cold green beans. She did not have to say anything. The silence in the room said it all. Captain Declan Thorne had tested the new operator. He had gambled his reputation on a public display of dominance, and he had lost in a way he could not even begin to comprehend. His career had not ended, not yet. But a fatal crack had just appeared in its foundation. 2 days later, the mission alert came. The call crackled over the secure network shortly after midnight, pulling the key members of the Expeditionary Analysis Group from their racks. They assembled in the Tactical Operations Center, a windowless room humming with the low thrum of servers and glowing with the cool blue light of a dozen monitors. A satellite feed dominated the main screen, showing a high-resolution, black-and-white image of a forbidding landscape of canyons and jagged peaks. The commander, a Navy captain named Peterson, who spent most of his time fighting bureaucratic battles, stood before the screen. He was a capable administrator, but lacked the field experience of the people he commanded, a fact that made him susceptible to the influence of strong personalities. "Intelligence has a credible report," Peterson began, his voice tight with the importance of the moment. "A significant weapons cache is being staged in the Alcor Canyon system, approximately 60 kilometers from here. We believe it's for a major insurgent offensive planned for the coming weeks. We need eyes on, confirmation of the type and quantity of munitions." He pointed to a specific location on the map, a narrow fork where 3 smaller ravines converged. "The signal intercept places the cache here. It's a simple reconnaissance mission, in and out, no contact if possible. We just need to verify the intel." Anya studied the map. The terrain was complex, a maze of overlapping ridges and deep shadows that would make both insertion and extraction difficult. The weather reports she had reviewed earlier that evening predicted high winds moving in from the west by morning. It was not a simple mission, it was a trap for the unwary. "I'll take my team," Captain Thorne said, stepping forward. His voice was steady, but Anya could see the tension in his jaw. He had been quiet and sullen for 2 days, avoiding her, nursing his bruised ego. This was his chance to reassert himself, to wash away the humiliation of the mess hall with a display of professional competence in his own element. "We can be ready to move in 30 minutes. Commander Peterson nodded, then hesitated. He glanced toward Anya, then back at Thorne. "The objective of this unit is inter-service integration. Lieutenant Sharma will accompany your team." A palpable tension filled the room. Thorne's face hardened. "Sir, with all due respect, my team operates with a specific rhythm. We're fast and lean. Adding an unknown element, someone who hasn't trained with us, could compromise our operational security and speed." It was a professional-sounding objection, but everyone in the room knew the real reason. He did not want her there. He could not stand the idea of being in the field with the woman who had effortlessly humbled him. "My decision is final, Captain," Peterson said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He was following the directive he had been given, forcing the integration whether it was welcome or not. "Lieutenant Sharma has expertise in technical surveillance that will be critical for identifying the contents of the cache. You will be the team lead. She will be your tactical advisor on site. Make it work." Thorne shot Anya a look of pure venom before turning away to brief his men. Anya felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was not fear. It was the chilling certainty of a flawed plan. Peterson, in his attempt to enforce teamwork, had created the most dangerous possible dynamic. He had placed her under the command of a man who now had a personal, emotional reason to see her fail. In the field, where decisions were measured in seconds and mistakes were paid for in blood, a leader's ego could be more dangerous than any enemy ambush. She was being sent into the canyons not just with a team, but with a liability. As she moved to the armory to draw her weapon and equipment, she met Master Chief Vance's gaze. He gave her a short, sharp nod. It was not a gesture of encouragement, it was an acknowledgement. He saw the danger too. They moved under the cover of a moonless night, a file of 6 shadows flitting across the gravelly plain that led to the foothills of the Alcor Canyon system. The insertion had been clean, a low-altitude drop from a helicopter 5 kilometers out. Now, there was only the sound of their boots crunching on the loose rock and the whisper of the wind picking up from the west. Anya moved near the rear of the formation, her rifle held in a low-ready position, her senses fully alive. She scanned the ridgelines, noted the deep pockets of shadow, listened to the rhythm of the men's breathing. Captain Thorne set a punishing pace, a clear attempt to test her physical limits. He was trying to run her into the ground before they even reached the objective. Anya simply fell into her stride, her breathing deep and even, her heart rate a steady, controlled drum. She had spent weeks training at high altitude, running for miles with a heavy pack until her lungs burned and her legs screamed. This was nothing. The men on Thorne's team, however, were starting to labor, their breathing becoming more ragged, their movements less precise. They were fit, but they were sprinters, trained for explosive action. Anya was built for endurance. She could do this all night. As they entered the mouth of the first canyon, the wind began to howl, funneling between the high rock walls. It carried sand with it, fine particles that stung any exposed skin and worked their way into every piece of equipment. The temperature began to drop. Anya pulled up her neck gaiter, the fabric a thin but welcome barrier against the abrasive air. Within an hour, the wind had escalated from a nuisance to a serious environmental threat. A full-blown sandstorm was upon them, a roiling, blinding wall of dust that reduced visibility to less than 5 feet. The world became a maelstrom of brown chaos. The comforting glow of the stars vanished, the ridgelines disappeared. Their night vision equipment became nearly useless, the sensitive amplifiers overwhelmed by the swirling particulates, presenting a screen of glittering, meaningless static. They were moving blind. Thorne pushed on, shouting orders that were snatched away by the wind. "Keep up! Push through it! Objective is 2 clicks ahead!" Anya felt the cohesion of the team beginning to fray. The man in front of her was a vague silhouette, disappearing and reappearing in the dense, choking dust. They were losing visual contact, relying solely on the sound of the person ahead. It was a recipe for disaster. One wrong turn, one fall, and a man could be lost in seconds. Thorne was relying on his global positioning system device, but even that was becoming unreliable. The dense static-charged dust in the canyon's high walls were interfering with the satellite signals. The device's indicator blinked from green to amber, its accuracy degrading with every passing minute. Thorne was leading them with a combination of blind faith and sheer stubbornness. He was treating the storm like an enemy to be assaulted, a force to be overcome through pure aggression. But one cannot assault a storm. One can only endure it or be broken by it. Anya felt a change in the ground beneath her feet. The gentle upward slope they had been following flattened out, then began to descend into a steeper, narrower channel. The rock walls closed in. She stopped. The man behind her nearly collided with her. Up ahead, she could hear Thorne cursing. The team bunched up, a confused cluster of shadows in the gale. "What is it? What's the holdup?" Thorne's voice was a ragged shout, barely audible over the roar of the wind. "Sir, it's a dead end," one of his corporals yelled back. "Looks like a sheer drop-off just ahead." They had walked into a box canyon, a perfect natural trap. Thorne's aggressive head-down navigation had led them into a fatal error. They were exposed, disoriented, and cornered. The simple reconnaissance mission was unraveling, and the enemy had not even fired a single shot. The environment itself had become the primary threat, and their leader had just proven himself incapable of meeting it. "This is not a dead end," Captain Thorne insisted, his voice a strained yell over the wind's shriek. He was shining his red-lensed flashlight against a wall of rock that rose straight up into the swirling darkness. "The map shows a passage. We just need to find it." He was projecting confidence, but Anya could hear the tremor of uncertainty beneath it. He was refusing to accept the reality of his mistake. His ego was blinding him to the tactical truth of their situation. They were wasting time and energy. The cold was beginning to seep through their gear, and the constant sand was abrading their equipment and their morale. The men were looking at Thorne, then at each other, their faith in his leadership visibly eroding in the chaotic darkness. Anya moved forward, stepping past the other members of the team until she was beside Thorne. She did not raise her voice. She did not challenge his authority directly. She simply presented facts. "Captain," she said, her voice calm and clear, pitched just loud enough to be heard, "your global positioning system signal is degraded. The map is useless without a reliable position fix. Pushing forward blindly will get us lost or injured." Thorne turned on her, his face a tight mask of anger in the dim red light. "I don't need a lecture on navigation from you, Lieutenant." This is not a lecture, Captain. It is a tactical assessment, she replied, her tone unwavering. We have been moving for 2 hours. Our current course has led us into a terrain trap. The storm is worsening. Continuing on this path is illogical. She pointed back the way they had come, into the roaring darkness. About 500 meters back, we passed a rock formation, a series of overhangs on the eastern wall. They offer shelter from the wind. We can establish a temporary rally point there, re-establish communications, and wait for the storm to break. It is the only tactically sound option. Her logic was cold, simple, and undeniable. She was not offering an opinion. She was stating a fact. She had taken command not by shouting or issuing orders, but by presenting a superior plan. The other men on the team were listening, their postures shifting. They were cold, tired, and a little scared. Anya was offering them a solution. Thorn was offering them more of the same blind stumbling that had gotten them trapped. We are not halting the mission, Thorn snarled, trying to reassert his dominance. We press on. To where, Captain? Anya asked quietly. You do not know where we are. You are leading your men into a fatal situation based on nothing but pride. The word hung in the air between them. Pride. It was the truth, and he knew it. One of the corporals, a young man whose face was caked with dust, spoke up, his voice hesitant. Sir, the lieutenant is right. We're burning out. We need to find cover. It was a small mutiny, but it was enough. Thorn's authority, already cracked, shattered completely. He looked from the corporal to Anya, his eyes blazing with a hatred that was now mixed with the bitter taste of defeat. He had lost control of his team. Fine, he spat out the word like a piece of poison. We fall back to the overhangs. But this mission is on you now, Lieutenant. You get us out of this. Anya simply nodded. Get your men turned around, Captain. She let him give the orders, allowing him to save a final tattered shred of his authority, but everyone knew who was now leading them. She took point, not with a map or a compass, but with an innate sense of the terrain she had memorized from the satellite photos. She used the feel of the wind on her face, the slope of the ground under her boots, the subtle changes in the acoustics of the canyon. She led them back through the storm, a calm, certain presence in the heart of the chaos. She had taken control, not because she wanted it, but because she was the only one there who was qualified to have it. They reached the overhangs she had identified, a shallow series of rock shelves that provided a crucial respite from the direct fury of the storm. The wind still howled past the opening, but within the protected space, the air was relatively calm. The men slumped against the rock wall, exhausted and relieved. Anya immediately began organizing a defense, placing 2 men on watch at either end of the shelf, their sectors of fire overlapping. Check your equipment, drink water, stay alert, she said, her commands quiet and direct. The men complied without question. Captain Thorn stood apart, his back to the team, staring out into the swirling sand. He was isolated by his own failure. After a few minutes, the storm began to abate. The wind's roar subsided to a mournful moan, and the thick dust thinned into a hazy fog. Visibility improved to 50, then 100 feet. The canyon reappeared around them, a ghostly landscape of pale rock under a sky still thick with dust. It was in that eerie, sudden silence that they heard it, the scrape of a boot on rock from above them. Anya's head snapped up. She raised a closed fist, the universal signal for freeze. The entire team went rigid. Another sound, a dislodged pebble clattering down the cliff face to their left. They were not alone. The ambushers must have been waiting out the storm as well, hunkered down on the ridgeline above, and had been just as surprised by the storm's sudden break as they were. The sounds were careless, the mistakes of an enemy who thought they were alone. Contact high, Anya whispered into her radio, her voice a thread of ice. Before she could give another command, Thorn reacted. His humiliation had been simmering, and the sudden appearance of a tangible enemy gave him an outlet for his rage. Engage! He roared, raising his rifle and firing a wild burst toward the top of the ridge. It was the worst possible thing he could have done. He had given away their exact position and squandered the element of surprise. Muzzle flashes answered him from the rocks above. The fight was on. The incoming rounds were sporadic and inaccurate at first, snapping and cracking high over their heads. The enemy was firing blind, just trying to suppress them. Get to cover! Return fire! Anya commanded, her voice cutting through Thorn's undisciplined roar. The team, now conditioned to listen to her, scrambled for better positions behind rock outcroppings. She directed their fire, calling out targets, conserving ammunition, making every shot count. Corporal, suppress that position, 10 o'clock high. Sergeant, watch our right flank. The firefight was chaotic. a visceral symphony of noise and flying debris in the dusty twilight. Thorn, however, was consumed by a berserker fury. He charged out from behind the cover of the overhang, firing his rifle on full automatic, screaming a challenge into the canyon. "Come on, come and get it!" He was a magnificent, terrifying, and stupid target. He immediately drew the bulk of the enemy's fire. Rounds impacted the rock all around him, kicking up chips of stone. A lucky shot struck his rifle, shattering the stock and sending the weapon spinning from his hands. Another round grazed his thigh, and he cried out, stumbling to one knee. He was pinned down, disarmed, and wounded, completely exposed in the middle of a kill zone. Anya saw it all unfold in the space of a few heartbeats. She saw Thorn, helpless. She saw the other members of his team, pinned by suppressive fire, unable to help him, and she saw a new threat. From a narrow crevice to Thorn's left, an insurgent fighter was emerging, a knife in his hand, moving to finish the downed captain. There was no time for a calculated plan. There was only time for action. Anya broke from her cover. She did not run in a straight line. She moved in a low, weaving crouch, using the sparse rocks for momentary concealment. She was not screaming. She was not firing. She was a study in silent, lethal efficiency. The enemy fighters on the ridge were focused on the other members of the team, who were providing a steady base of suppressive fire as she had trained them. They did not see her moving through the shadows below. She closed the distance to the insurgent, stalking Thorn in 5 seconds. The man heard her at the last moment and turned, his eyes wide with surprise. He was larger than her, stronger than her. A direct confrontation would be a foolish gamble, so she did not confront him. As he raised his knife, she did not try to block the weapon. She dove low inside the arc of his swing, her shoulder impacting his lead knee. There was a sickening crunch as the joint hyperextended backward. The man shrieked in agony, his leg collapsing beneath him. His knife clattered to the ground as his body contorted in pain. His fighting ability was gone, but he was alive. A prisoner. An intelligence asset. Minimal necessary force. Anya scooped up the fallen knife and spun toward Thorn, who was staring at her, his face a mixture of pain and utter astonishment. "Get back," she yelled, her voice a sharp crack of command. She provided covering fire with her sidearm, forcing the heads of the remaining ambushers down, while Thorn scrambled and limped his way back to the relative safety of the overhang. The fight was over. The remaining enemy fighters, seeing their comrade fall and realizing they had lost their advantage, melted back into the rocks. Silence, heavy and ringing, descended once more on the canyon. Anya stood over the incapacitated insurgent, her pistol trained on him, her breathing controlled, her heart a steady hammer in her chest. The rest of the team stared at her, then at their captain, who was now slumped against the rock wall, clutching his wounded leg, his face pale. She had not just saved his life. She had demonstrated in the most brutal and undeniable way the vast gulf that lay between his reckless aggression and her disciplined competence. The debriefing room was cold and sterile. Commander Peterson sat at the head of a long, polished table. Master Chief Vance stood against the back wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Anya sat at the table, her posture perfect. Captain Thorn sat opposite her, a fresh dressing on his thigh visible beneath his clean utility uniform. His face was a blank slate, all the swagger and arrogance scoured out of him. The other members of the reconnaissance team sat along the sides of the table. Commander Peterson had already read the after-action reports. He had the transcript from the tactical radio net. He had the preliminary intelligence summary from the captured insurgent, who, it turned out, was a mid-level commander with a wealth of knowledge about enemy movements in the region. The simple reconnaissance mission had become a significant intelligence victory, but not in the way anyone had planned. "Let's go over this one more time," Commander Peterson said, his voice flat. He looked at the senior corporal from Thorn's team. "Corporal, describe the conditions when the sandstorm hit." The corporal sat up straight. "Sir, visibility was 0. We were lost. Captain Thorn was trying to push through, but we ended up in a box canyon. We were in a bad way." "And then what happened?" "Lieutenant Sharma took control, sir," the corporal said, not looking at Thorn. "She found us shelter. She got us organized. Her navigation in the storm was unbelievable. She led us out of the trap." Peterson turned to the sergeant. "Sergeant, describe the initial moments of the enemy contact." The sergeant cleared his throat. "Sir, Lieutenant Sharma identified the threat before they fired. She was trying to get us into a better position, but Captain Thorn began firing and gave away our position. He charged out into the open." The sergeant paused, then added, "He was pinned down. We couldn't get to him. The lieutenant saved his life. She took down an enemy fighter single-handedly and got the captain back to cover." The testimony continued, each man giving a clear, factual, and damning account of the mission. They were not being malicious. They were simply stating the truth. They described Thorne's reckless pace, his navigational errors, his loss of composure, his tactical blunders during the firefight, and they described Anya's calm leadership, her precise commands, her flawless navigation, and her decisive, life-saving actions. Finally, Peterson turned to Thorne. "Captain, do you have anything to add or dispute in these accounts?" Thorne was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the polished surface of the table. When he finally looked up, his eyes were hollow. "No, sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The reports are accurate. It was a complete capitulation. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a shame so profound it was almost a physical presence in the room." Commander Peterson steepled his fingers, his expression grim. "Captain Thorne, your actions on this mission demonstrated a catastrophic failure of leadership. You allowed your personal ego to endanger your men and compromise the mission. You ignored the counsel of a fellow officer, made a series of grave tactical errors, and abandoned all discipline when under fire. That you are alive today is due solely to the competence and courage of Lieutenant Sharma." He let the words hang in the silent room. "You are hereby relieved of your command duties, effective immediately," Peterson continued, his voice like chipping ice. "You will be confined to base pending a formal investigation, but I can tell you now, your career as a field operator is over. You will be reassigned to a training billet at a stateside depot. You are dismissed." Thorne stood slowly, his injured leg stiff. He did not look at anyone. He simply turned and walked out of the room, a man who had been professionally and spiritually broken. His career had not just ended before it started, it had imploded, a victim of its own arrogance. After a moment of silence, Commander Peterson looked at Anya. His expression had softened from stern judgment to something approaching awe. "Lieutenant," he said, "that was some of the finest tactical leadership I've ever seen reviewed. You saved the lives of 5 men and secured a high-value intelligence asset. Well done," Anya simply nodded. "Thank you, sir." Later that day, as she was cleaning her rifle in the armory, Master Chief Vance approached her. He stood silently for a moment, watching the precise, practiced economy of her movements as she disassembled the weapon. "Heard the news about Thorne," Vance said, his voice a low rumble. Anya did not look up from her work. "Yes, Master Chief." "Some people think leadership is about being the loudest voice in the room," he said, more to himself than to her. "They're always the first ones to fall." He paused, then looked directly at her. "You did good work out there, Lieutenant. Real good work." It was the highest praise she could imagine receiving from a man like him. It was quiet, understated, and utterly sincere. Around the base, the atmosphere had changed. The whispers that followed her were no longer tinged with skepticism and mockery. They were tinged with respect and a little bit of fear. Lieutenant Miller, the young intelligence officer, now made a point of sitting with her in the mess hall, asking quiet, intelligent questions about navigation and tactical positioning. He was learning. The culture was shifting, one person at a time, because they had seen the proof. Competence was the only currency that truly mattered. The pre-dawn air in the gymnasium was cold and still. Anya moved through a series of deep restorative stretches, her body coiling and uncoiling with the slow grace of a predatory cat. The aches from the mission were fading, replaced by the familiar feeling of well-used muscles. The base was quiet around her, the cycle of tension and release temporarily at rest. The incident in the canyon, the debriefing, the reassignment of Captain Thorne, it all felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been a few days. It was already becoming part of the base's institutional memory, a cautionary tale that would be told for years to come. She was not thinking about Thorne, or the fight, or the newfound respect she had earned. Those were outcomes, consequences of a process. Her focus was on the process itself, the discipline, the control, the endless repetitive pursuit of perfection. She had not sought to defeat Thorne. She had simply refused to allow his ego to defeat the mission. She had not sought to prove herself. She had simply performed her duties to the absolute best of her ability. The results had taken care of themselves. She finished her stretching sequence, her body feeling loose and centered. The first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky, visible through the high windows of the gym. A new day was beginning. For her, it would be the same as all the others, a day of training, of study, of preparation, a day of maintaining the internal fortress of discipline that was the source of all her strength. She gathered her small towel and her water bottle, her movements unhurried. As she walked toward the door, leaving the empty gym behind her, a single clarifying thought settled in her mind. a truth forged in the crucible of conflict and control. Strength is not the power to win, but the discipline not to lose.